Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with my Skaven unit tier list for Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires for the campaign. Now it is worth pointing out that depending on which Legendary Lord you're playing of the Skaven, you will focus on different army compositions. But even in a singular campaign, depending on how you're building an army, you can have many different playstyles and many different army compositions that can work. What I'm going to do here for this tier list is just give a general purpose situation, though of course, if you're playing, say, Cinch, you will want Night Runners, Gutter Runners. If you're playing Ekiclaw, you'll want artillery range units. If you're playing Front, you might focus on monsters and so on and so forth. But still, let's start with Skaven Slaves, F tier units, all of them, all three versions of the Skaven Slaves are F tier units. Simple reason, they're designed to be terrible units. The only saving grace of these guys is they're very cheap. And I understand the mentality, but the problem is, even with the reduced supply lines of Warhammer 3, massing a huge amount of Skaven slaves may not necessarily be worth it. Their leadership is bad, and there is a limit on how many units you can bring on a battle. Like, if you could outnumber the enemy, 6-1 in an actual battle, bit of a different situation. I think that is one aspect that's lacking with regards to Skaven and Total War in general. But just not worth recruiting. The only situations in which you'd recruit them is, one, you get a bunch of benefits for them. Two, if you're playing Front, you can get a bunch of different benefits for them. But even then, you're probably better off focusing on other things, even in those campaigns. Like, yeah, you can get, Skaven Warlord, you can buff these guys quite in various ways, but they're still going to remain trash units. Cheap, to be sure, but Skaven can get a lot of money through different ways. Then we have Clan Rats. So, the Clan Rats without shields, I'm also going to put them in F tier units. Just literally not worth recruiting in almost any way. Like, their melee capability is lacking, their survivability is lacking, their cost, okay, just because a unit is cheap does not make them worthwhile. Same deal with Clan Rats with shields, regular ones. Clan Rats with spears, I'm going to put these guys as a D tier unit. I think if you're looking for some kind of early game line holder with the Skaven, these guys are the only one that's actually worth recruiting. Because especially if you're dealing with fast moving units, since they do have that spear. But even then, they're not especially great at the job. Like, Clan Rats, I might be exaggerating in how horrible they are, but you gotta understand, they are, as far as early game infantry goes, they're one of the worst early game infantry in the game. And because there's only so many units you can bring in a battle, you kind of grasp the idea, the problem that's going on. I mean, I obviously consider campaigns on Legendary where an AI can recruit a lot of units in army, and dealing with full stacks is the norm. And in that kind of situation, like, if you're looking to recruit units, there's much better choices. And Skaven have the ability of recruiting armies very quickly. That's not a problem. They have the money for it too. But is it worth recruiting these guys, considering their crap stats, crap leadership? Not really in any way, shape, or form. Then we have Plague Monks and Plague Monks with Census Bearers. I think regular Plague Monks, pretty bad unit, not really. Like, they're a damage dealing cheap tier infantry. They'll do more damage than Clan Rats, sure, but their survivability is absolutely not that great. But Census Bearers, they might be worth recruiting. Sure, they do require a higher tier, but they have better durability, they have various effects, they can do a decent amount of damage in combat, so these guys might be actually worth it in Skaven campaigns in general. The regular version, I would not even bother with in Scrolls campaign. If you're recruiting these guys in Scrolls campaign, you might suffer. I mean, they're not F tier, they're not complete garbage, but the value proposition in a battle is just very questionable. Then we have Warp Grinders. Warp Grinders, I take the view that Warp Grinders are an S tier unit. To be sure, you don't want to necessarily mass these guys in an army, because they're not really a mainline unit. They're a support unit. They have Wall Breaker, they have a bunch of debuffs in a battle. They can hold their own decently well, but you just gotta understand that limitation that they have. For what they are, in sieges they're fantastic. In field battles they play a vital support role. They can help protect your flanks. Just don't use them as a mainline unit. They're not meant for that. They're meant for flank protection, for supporting your line, for debuffing the enemy. That's their role in a battle. They play it very well. They're very easy to recruit, very fast to recruit. Absolutely worth it. By the way, it's kind of worth pointing out that Skaven are lacking in very cheap tier 1 units. They have fantastic tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, tier 5 units. But very early on in a campaign, they can feel very lacking in terms of tier 1 units. Outside of Snitch's situation, sure. But I'm talking here in generalities. That can be, by the way, a bit of a problem. That's only context in which you'd bother with clan rats or plague monks, but even then, still, given the way Skaven settlement occupation works, you don't have an excuse not to get to tier 2 and tier 3 very quickly in your campaigns. Next up, we have Death Runners. Death Runners, I think, are a C-tier infantry unit. They're decent enough at their job as a high damage, kind of low durability unit, though their durability is not necessarily that bad. The real problem is, in terms of prolonged melee engagement, they're kind of hit and run melee unit, go in there, do some damage, get the heck out, leave other units to soak the damage. That's great in theory, but there are, better units that kind of playstyle available for a Skaven, even at the lower tier, that just overall are worth it more on a battlefield. They're not good line holders. Obviously, none of these Skaven sneaky boys are good line holders, but the other sneaky boys that the Skaven do have more things that they can offer during the course of a battle. So, from my point of view, Death Runners are, from that entire building chain, Death Runners are the only unit that's actually not worth recruiting in pretty much any kind of situation. Everything else is worth recruiting, not Death Runners. Because the units that are lower tier, from that same building, are worth recruiting more, they're worth recruiting en masse more, and if you're looking for a couple of units to give you damage capability in an army to support the rest of your army, there are frankly substantially superior options available for the Skaven. Vastly superior options. So, not worthless, far from it, just not really a great unit. Ashen Triads, I'm gonna say they're a B tier unit. Again, a specialist unit, if you will. Though, while Death Runners are focused on dealing with infantry, Ashen Triads, who have many of the same issues as Death Runners, but Ashen Triads are anti-cav. They're a support infantry unit, that's how you should view them. They're meant to either reinforce the section of the front line that you have, if you have a front line, that's a different discussion for the Skaven altogether. But they're good at holding off enemy cavalry from your precious glass cannon units. And you have quite a few of those available in a Skaven campaign. So B tier unit gets the job that it's meant to done, but also, I'm just gonna say I think Warp Grinders are better for that role overall, though you don't want either Warp Grinders or Ashen Triads getting shot up by enemy ranged. You also don't want them necessarily in a prolonged melee engagement, but both of them get the job done at dealing with shock cavalry, keeping it away, harassing it, annoying it. Just I think Warp Grinders in general are a better unit for that purpose. That's my view. Storm Vermin, the mainline Skaven infantry unit. These are armored Kossars for Kislev, except here's the problem, or a couple of problems. When we're talking about certain units, It can be fine having a high cost for certain units. It can be fine having multiple turns of recruitment for certain units. That is not a great situation for infantry units to have to deal with, because you may want to mass infantry units. Storm Vermin, even for Tretch and Queek, are not good enough in a combat situation that you want to mass them. So that's one of the roles that a heavy infantry unit has that goes right out the window with these guys. They're not durable enough. They don't have the damage dealing capability enough. They don't have... they're just, in general, not that worth recruiting. Now, one can argue, well, Skaven have a bunch of recruitment slots, so it doesn't matter if some units take longer and they have a good economy. Fair enough. But, again, there's just flat-out better choices. In playing even a Queek or Tretch campaign is generally best. You can get a couple of these, especially if you're playing Tretch. But I generally find the melee, Skaven melee line to be lackluster. Again, not the durability, not the damage, not the cost effectiveness, not the recruitment time. And in some campaigns you can get away with that. But Skaven are so widely hated by so many races on the campaign map that you need to keep moving. You don't have time. Even with the secondary lord, that's just recruiting. If you're recruiting another army with another lord, generally speaking, you'll get more value by recruiting units that can be done faster, so you can get another entire army on the field. Or if you're recruiting a couple of units to reinforce one of your main armies, there's also better choices from that perspective. Then we have Night Runners and Night Runners with slings. If we were to talk about Clan Eshin, Snitch, these would be A-tier units because of their armor-piercing damage capability. But here's the thing about Night Runners. Sling version or precursor weapon version, they do a decent amount of damage. Their leadership is decent as far as Skaven units go. And while their durability on paper doesn't seem that great, in actual practice they're quite good at holding their own. But more importantly, when we're thinking about these guys, you go in, you go out. That's the role that Night Runners have in a battle. Go in, harass the enemy, do some damage on some section of the line. They're fast enough and durable enough to get the job done. But then we have Gutter Runners. So Gutter Runners, both versions. So be it the poison version, which does require an extra building and maybe an annoyance to acquire. But Gutter Runners get shit done. They're more durable. They can get that poison weapon. I think that should, by the way, be an upgrade that you should just be able to buy for existing units because it's annoying. That's the reason I'm not putting the poison version higher tier. For Snitch, these guys are S tier. For everyone else, they're a pretty good A tier unit. So the sling version is, in most situations, is really good in the vast majority of situations. It's not the best ranged unit you have, but other better ranged units can have issues because of terrain, can struggle against certain units. These guys are good all-round ranged units. The melee version, with the precursor weapon, they're just flat out better than Night Runners, better durability, better stats, better damage. A natural unit upgrade that's also fairly easy to acquire. And you will want the building you get these guys from for the casualty replenishment hero anyway. Whereas with a Clan Rat Storm Vermin unit, you don't really care about the units from the building itself. You care about the hero, but the hero from this building is worthwhile more, or heroes, really, is worth it more, and the units in general just do a better job than anything from your baseline barracks in a Skaven campaign. Then we have Warfire Throwers. I'm probably going to have to shrink the Ekakla image again. But then we have Warpfire Throwers. Solid enough flamethrower unit, pretty decent durability, very easy to recruit. The only reason I'm not putting them higher is, yeah, there are situations in which flamethrowers just flat out don't work as a unit. Certain battlefields, but one, they're good in a siege, they're good in auto-resolve, they're not expensive, very easy to recruit, get the job done. You don't want to mass these guys, of course, but for what they are as a support unit, really solid unit choice to recruit. Globadiers, B tier unit, not horrible. Better options as far as artillery goes. Can do a decent amount of damage. Not horrible in durability cost or anything like that. Just they're outclassed by other Skaven range units, or quote-unquote artillery infantry, if you will, if you want to call it that. Still, they get the job done decently well enough, solid enough unit, just not an excellent unit. Bombardiers, ooh. So Bombardiers are a crazy powerful unit. Of course, with AK Claw especially, but in general, Bombardiers can do a significant amount of damage. They work different from Poison Wind Mortars. I would say a combination of those two is worth them more. So kind of just view them as a grenade unit, and that's probably the best way to use them in a battle, like just a grenade unit. Do damage, do a lot of AoE damage. Short range, of course, that can be an issue, situations in which they don't work, but these guys are absolutely worth recruiting. The sheer amount of damage that these guys can do in a battlefield is ridiculously good, if you're using them properly. So keep that in mind. You don't want to mass them in an army, but I do take a harsher view on units that you should mass in an army, like Storm Vermin or Klein Rats, versus units that inherently are not designed to be massed, but do a good job what they're designed to do in small quantities. A single unit of these guys can be a game changer in a battle. Not the easiest necessarily to recruit like Warp Grinders, but still, very good unit on a battlefield. And we have Poison Wind Mortars, yeah. A bit inconvenient to recruit. Again, that difference between a unit that you get in limited quantities versus a unit you should mass. Poison Wind Mortars are crazy powerful units. Their range, obviously it's not going to compare to the range of an artillery unit, but they do outrange most, or they can hold their own in terms of range damage capability, or their just range versus most regular range units in the game. And the damage these things do is, ooh, it hurts. There are a few things that when I'm playing in a battle against AI make me hesitate. These are one of these units, and Bombardiers. Like a couple, like Rattling Gunners, Jezzails, Plague Claws, Artillery, and all that. But I know if these guys get a single shot off at my army, I'm gonna feel it. And if you get a couple of shots off with these guys, like these guys can annihilate armies. Bombardiers can also do that, by the way, in different ways of dealing damage, all that. But both of them are very worthwhile, and they both complement each other very, very well. Rattling Gunners. A tier unit. Oh, not an S tier unit with Rattling Gunners. No, I don't think Rattling Gunners are an S tier unit. To explain that, Rattling Gunners are a short range Gatling gun that, if they are allowed to do continuous damage, they will decimate armies. But then you factor in terrain, then you factor in the fact that the AI will not necessarily let you do that. Like, these guys can go from being one of the units that single-handedly wins the battle for you to one of the most worthless units in the army. Skaven have ways of slowing units down, they have ways of blobbing the enemy up, all that. But it's just very situational as I feel it. The problem with Rattling Gunners is really the fact that they don't necessarily do that much damage per shot. They're more a continuous damage stream. But when you factor in terrain, AI tactics, and the inherent fucking issues of range units, you kind of understand what the problem with these guys. Like, they can go from being an S tier unit, an S tier plus unit in a battle, to being an F tier unit, like doing basically nothing. So is that issue with them. Then we have Jezzails. Like, Jezzails are an S tier unit because, one, Jezzails per shot can do a decent amount of damage, and they have such long range that they can, generally speaking, in the vast majority of cases, do at least some damage to an enemy can snipe their lords, can snipe higher priority targets. They will consistently do damage in almost every battle you use them. It might not be the highest damage, but it is important damage because you're focusing on specific targets. I do find Giselle, generally speaking, worth getting more. Like, I can go without using Rattling Gunners even in a Claw campaign and, rely on Warp Fires, Bombardiers, even Globadiers. But Giselles are almost universally worth recruiting in every single Skaven campaign, let alone a Nika Claw campaign. Next up, we have Doom Flayers. An A-tier unit, pretty solid chariot unit, that's how you should view them. Like, they serve the same purpose as a chariot. They're pretty fast, capable of dealing a decent amount of damage, and in fact, they might just be the best mount version for the Skaven in a battle. They're hard to target by enemy range units. You can throw them into the middle of an enemy battle line, and they'll do decently well enough, allowing you to distract the enemy army while the rest of your range forces obliterate them. So that is what Doomflayers do provide for the Skaven army. Worthwhile unit, if you can get your hands on it. I think it's worth it more as a mount option than as a standalone unit, but the standalone unit does get the job done, really. Decently effectively in a battle. I don't think they're an S-tier unit, but still, they get the job done. Doom Wheels, yeah, the big single entity of the Skaven. It is a good chariot unit as far as they go, but obviously they're vulnerable to, because of their size, right? They're vulnerable to range units, they're vulnerable to being targeted. They also do terribly in odd result for whatever unknowable reason. Decent enough at the role they have in a battle, just I find Doomflayers, generally speaking, better than Doom Wheels in terms of battlefield usage. Warp Lightning Cannons, A-tier unit, good artillery in terms of targeting specific units. Not necessarily the best AoE damage, but obviously in terms of like sniping artillery capability, that is what they provide in a battle. Gets the job done for what it is intended. Can be a bit annoying to recruit, to be sure, but as long as it's doing the job that it's meant to, and it's doing effectively. So, consider these like premium dwarf bolt throwers, and that's honestly an insult to Warp Lightning Cannons, because Warp Lightning Cannons at least are genuinely useful as an artillery choice. Plague Claw Catapult's also an A-tier unit. Sometimes, the reason I'm not putting them in A tier, if these things hit an enemy unit or an enemy blob, they do great damage in sieges, they do great damage on the battlefield, but their projectiles can be dodged, which, yeah, it is an annoying situation to have these things, to have these things miss, because obviously they're doing a pretty, they can do a solid amount of damage, but it's the same consequence as mortars. However, mortars for the Empire may not do that much damage per shot, whereas these things, you'll feel it. Like, Plague Claws are one of those units that can wipe out an entire army if one's not careful at avoiding them. And the AI can be careful, and then sometimes can lose half their freaking army in a couple of shots. Wolf Rats, yeah, I think that Wolf Rats are just D-tier unit. Lacking durability, lacking stats. The only quote-unquote benefit of these guys is that you can throw them in the middle of you can throw them in front of your gunpowder unit, so Giselles, Rattling Gunners, and obviously, have units fire above them. That is a useful trait, but yeah, just a very limited usefulness with regards to these guys from my perspective in a Skaven campaign. Not completely worthless to recruit, though. They're still very fast-moving units, so they can be a good harassment option. But still, just limited usage in general. Rat Ogres, I think like regular Rat Ogres are a B-tier unit. Not a horrible unit by any stretch of imagination. They're like trolls for the Skaven. They're not as good as stone trolls, but think of them like regular greenskin trolls. And regular greenskin trolls are a really, really good supplement to a greenskin army. These guys are a good supplement to a Skaven army. They're worth recruiting many times early on in a campaign, though their usefulness does decline later on as you keep playing throughout that campaign. Mutant Rat Ogres, S tier unit. There's a couple of things I like about Mutant Rat Ogres. They're a single entity, but they're not so big that enemy ranges can just fire them very easily, right? They do a good amount of damage. Throw these guys in the middle of an enemy army, get them stuck in very nicely. They'll do a lot of damage. They'll take down a good amount of the enemy with them. They'll get the job done. No complaints on that subject. There's, like, if you're looking for a big melee brawler for the Skaven, this is it. A good distraction carnifex, if you will, for the Skaven in a campaign. Then we have Brute Horrors, kind of like, I don't think they're as good as Mutant Rat Ogres, but they're still pretty solid at the job, I think. So I think like an A tier for these guys, like they kind of serve the same purpose in that, you know, distraction unit, pretty fast, or decently fast, can get stuck in, can deal with a decent amount of damages, you know, Brute Horrors, yeah, they get the job done that they're designed to. Hell Pit Abominations. A big, slow, single entity that doesn't have the durability of a Rogue Idol is going to go in D tier. It's not useless in as far as single entities go, but yeah, I just don't really see necessarily that much of a reason to recruit Hell Pit Abominations. If I want a single entity for the Skaven, I'll get Mutant Rat Ogres or Brute Horrors. Or I'll even recruit Doom Wheels. I just don't think Hell Pit Abominations are worth it any single time. Even in Fraud's campaign, where you can literally get these things for free because of his unique campaign mechanic, I think it's just worth using the VATs earlier than you can get these guys, because they're expensive. Their combat capability is not good enough to justify, like every other unit, every other monstrous units to specify. Every other monstrous unit is worth it more, for instance. Like, Rat Ogres are worth recruiting. Brood Horrors are worth recruiting. Mutant Rat Ogres are worth recruiting. Hell Pit Abominations are not worth recruiting in a Skaven campaign from my personal perspective. So that is the Skaven unit roster. Yeah, I know that Ecoclaw image is getting in the way right there. So yeah, just gonna shrink it even further. But that is where I stand with regards to the Skaven unit roster. So S tier, Warp Grinders, Bombardiers, Poison Wind Mortars, Jezzails, Mutant Rat Ogres. A tier, Gutter Runners, Poison Railing Gunners, all that. This is how I view the Skaven unit here. It is absolutely the problem with the lack of melee infantry. I think that, so Storm Vermin, the problem with Storm Vermin just that recruitment cost duration. Like, I think Storm Vermin should be cheaper for their combat capability, right? They should be cheaper, they should be faster to recruit. They're effectively a tier 2 unit that's masquerading as a tier 3 unit. And that's my problem with them. Like, if I'm playing, like, I consider them equivalent to Armored Kossars. But the problem is, one, Armored Kossars have a lot more fucking leadership than these guys, damn near unbreakable to begin with, and they're much cheaper to recruit, much faster to recruit, and sure, Skaven have a lot of recruitment slots to be sure, or compared to Kislev, but again, a tier requirement, even with the Skaven situation, you can argue, well, tier requirements are meaningless for the Skaven because they can get the settlement to whatever they want. Sure, but let me put it like this. If you're getting a settlement to tier 5, the building these guys, or tier 3 even, if you're getting a settlement to tier 3, the building these guys come from is not worth getting to tier 3. It's worth getting to tier 2 for the hero capacity, but not tier 3. It's a waste of money to recruit these guys. It's not an effective use of resources. And there's no situation in which I've played any kind of Skaven campaign where I thought, damn, I wish I had Storm Vermin. Like, if I want line holders as the Skaven, I got options. I'd rather recruit a bunch of Rat Ogres if I want to hold a line as Skaven. Sure, you have that issue with range units and all that kind of stuff kind of getting in the way. But I find Rat Ogres would just be a much more effective unit. Sure, with all the caveats that come from a monstrous unit thrown in the mix. But either way, that's all I had to say. Costin signing out. Hope you all enjoyed this.